Hello everyone, welcome, shalom. It's a great pleasure to be together one more time studying a little bit of Torah and sharing this virtual classroom to enrich our lives through the messages of our holy Torah. Oh, Shelly Chochinov, you made it. So happy. Welcome to David Wilder and all our friends from near and from far. It's great to know that we have so many friends that they live in Winnipeg and so many others that they're all over the world. So if you are one of those, if you are tuning in from anywhere in the world, please let me know in the chat. The chat is open. I always like to know where people are connecting from. It's because it's great to know that digital technology has no borders. We are connected from whatever we are. It's a great feeling. And I know we cannot be together in person, and that hurts. But at the same time, we have to learn to see the positive on everything that life brings. So I don't think that everything is negative about the virtual world. One of the things that I love about it is this amazing opportunity to reach to people wherever they are. There is no traffic jams. There is no problems finding parking spots. The temperature of the room is always right because it's in your hand. The volume is never too low or too loud. It's all up to you. So there are many positive things, and I believe that's something that we should bring to our daily lives. The mentality, the mindset of finding the blessings wherever we go or from whatever life brings to us. Michael Legoff, South San Vital, exciting enough? No, it is not. But here we have Roberto Franco from Puerto Rico, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Hi, Marie Nazen, welcome. It's great to have you in my classroom, and we are going to study something a little bit different. I don't want to be too complicated, but as I mentioned in the previous class, and then it kept repeating in my head, there is a lot of hidden messages in the Torah, specifically in the book of Genesis. The interesting thing is, all the halacha, all the law will be found mainly starting on the book of Exodus. And that's the next book of the Torah. The book of Genesis, lots of stories, lots of weird stories, lots of controversial stories, and not too much to learn from the legal point of view. So that gives us an opportunity to try to understand God's idea of revealing this book that is not really teaching us much of what we have to do from the legal point of view, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have messages to enrich our lives. The thing is, many of the messages of the book of Genesis are hidden. And we are going to talk about today about the different ways to approach the Torah, the mystical one being the last out of 4 ways that we understand and we study Torah. And so, let's get to it. But before that, just please remember, if this is the first time that you are watching one of our streams, please remember to subscribe, and if you're on YouTube, hit the bell so you will be notified every time we go live or every time we upload some material to the internet. We don't want you to miss any of our content. We promise you it's inspirational, it's educational, and I'm pretty sure it will be a great benefit for your life. So don't miss it. Just subscribe. If you're on Facebook, please, you have to like our page, our Shari Zedek Facebook page, and you will also be notified every time we go live. Hello, Rocky Pollock. You're not late. I'm just giving a little bit of an introduction to the class. So let's get to the class for today, and as I mentioned before, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different levels of studying the Torah. And I will give you a little bit of a preview what I'm talking about. In Judaism, we say that we study Torah through four different methods. First one is pshat, which basically means the literal meaning of the text. Then we have the remes, that is to try to find the allegory in whatever we read. Then we move to drash, which is basically what we call the midrash, the way the rabbis use homiletics to teach us something. And then we have the last one, the fourth, which is called sod. If you know anything about Hebrew, sod means secret, which means the mystical approach to the text of the Torah, which is amazing because many of the time when you study the Torah from the mystical point of view, it has nothing to do with the literal meaning of the verse, which is kind of interesting. It's almost like sometimes the literal meaning of the verse is a veil, and you have to be able to remove that veil if you want to see something beyond that literal meaning of the text. Hello, Sarah Aronson. Good to see that you are connected. Welcome. So, the first text that I had for you is a very famous midrash that is found in the Talmud and then in the Zohar. The Zohar will expand a little bit about it, and it goes like this. This is the text of the four rabbis who entered to the orchard. Let's read it together. It says, the rabbis taught, four entered the Pardes. Literally means the orchard, but Pardes is actually also an acronym for Pshat, Remes, Drash, and Sod. So it's a very interesting use of the word Pardes. It is an orchard, but it's also an acronym. So the four rabbis were Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. Acher, by the way, was Elisha ben Abuya. Have you ever heard that name? Was one of the most famous, how do you call it? What's the word? Somebody, when you quit Judaism, basically. And it has a name. If somebody remember what I'm trying to say here, please type it in the chat. But they call it Acher, which in Hebrew means the other. It's almost like Harry Potter. I don't know if you watch it. They are always talking about you know who. So this is like Acher. Nobody wanted to say the name. Elisha ben Abuya was a forbidden name because of what he did. So they call him Acher because it's interesting that even though he was an outsider in the later part of his life, it's almost like he still had lots to teach. And some of his sayings were incorporated into the text, into the Talmud, into the Zohar. So again, the four rabbis were Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, you probably heard about him. So Rabbi Akiva said to them, when you come to the place of pure marble stones, do not say, water, water. For it is said, he who speaks untruths shall not stand before my eyes. Ben Azai gazed and died. Regarding him, the verse states, precious in the eyes of God is the death of his pious ones. Ben Zoma gazed and was harmed. Basically, he went crazy. Regarding him, the verse states, did you find honey? Eat as only much as you need, lest you be overfilled and vomited up. Acher, Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, cut down the plantings. He became a heretic. That's a word. But no, I was thinking about something else. Not the word heretic, it's another word. And Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and left in peace. Now let's try to understand a few things behind this. Is because it's very cryptic. First, why are they talking about the Pardes? Well, it seems to imply that four entered the four levels of studying the Torah. They were rabbis. So they wanted to understand the Torah the best they could. So they navigated these 4 different levels. And they all seems to struggle with the 4th one, with the sod, with the mystical part of the Torah. And that's why Rabbi Akiva said, go, study Torah, let's go to the Pardes. But when you come to the place of pure marble stones, that means when you come to that mystical level, specifically a mystic connection with God, when you reach that level, do not say water, water. What does it mean? We're going to see in a minute. This has a very interesting meaning. Why not water, water? Why not just water? Why water, water? Wait for it. Okay? Because it says, he who speaks untruth shall not stand before my eyes. So it's almost like saying that when you are in the presence of God through Kabbalah, through the study and meditation of mystical teachings, when you are in that place, saying water, water is a lie. It's not true. It's inappropriate. Why? So, but then this is interesting. What happened is the 4 different rabbis had 4 different outcomes. And we have to understand this, the 4 rabbis representing 4 different kind of students. Otherwise, it wouldn't be part of the text. They're trying to say that this is not something that happened to them. This is something that could happen or have been happening to us throughout history, or it can happen to you if you embark in the study of Torah. So, let's see what happened, and then perhaps we can understand a little bit better. So we have here another text related to this that was presented by Rabbi Moses ben Yaakov Cordovero, but it's also found in the Zohar. It says, the ancient Saba, basically it's like the elder, we don't know who he is, said to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Remember who was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? The one who actually wrote the Zohar. Actually, that's according to the rabbis. He was the one who wrote the Zohar. He said to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi, holy lamp, surely the pure marble stones are the letter Yud, one the upper Yud of the letter Aleph, and the other one the lower Yud of the letter Aleph. Here there is no spiritual impurity, only pure marble stones. And so there is no separation between one water and the other. They form a single unity from the aspect of the tree of life, which is the Vav in the midst of the letter Aleph. In this regard it states, lest he put forth his hand, and if he takes of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. So let's go by parts here. This is a very profound, very, very profound text. Michael, what are you saying? Let me see. OTD is the term Hasid. OTD is the Hasidic term used for off the derech. You may mean denouncing your faith. Not sure you can stop being Jewish. Perhaps expelled through excommunication. No, this is actually the heretic concept is very interesting. It's the one that you reach a point in Judaism that you quit. Of course, you technically don't stop being Jewish unless you're excommunicated. But it's when you said, this is all wrong, so I'm out. We're going to see why the rabbis believe Elisha ben Abuya was at that point. So basically, I don't know if you've ever seen the letter Aleph that is talking about here. Let me see if I can find for you letter Aleph, and I will add it here so you can see what I'm talking about. I should have done this before, and I will try to copy. Yeah, can you see the letter Aleph here? Excellent. You see, the rabbis are saying here that you have to use your imagination. Basically, this letter Aleph here, it's almost like it has one letter Yud at the top, right there, and one letter Yud at the bottom. Of course, this letter Aleph that I presented for you is kind of an artistic interpretation of the letter Aleph. But if you see the letter Aleph in the pure form, it looks like there are two letter Yuds, which is the little one in Hebrew, and one letter Vav that goes in an angle in between the two. It's almost like the upper part of the Aleph and the bottom part of the Aleph are a mirror of each other. And the line in between, the Vav, is the division between the upper and the lower. And this is very interesting, because what I'm saying here is that this concept of the upper and the lower and the division of the two is the way we live life in this world. The rabbis call this world the world of duality. When we will see it on creation, at the beginning of creation, God creates the letter Vav, the letter Bet, sorry, that's the beginning. Bereshit starts with the letter Bet. The numerical value of the letter Bet is 2. That's a hint that the world created, when the world was created, duality was created. Before that, all we had was God. Also called sometimes that before creation was something called the Ein Sof, something without end. But at the same time, we got understanding of something that it was perfectly one. There was no concept of 2 or 3 or whatever. Nothing beyond the perfect one. When the world was created, poof, all of a sudden, we have the duality and opposites. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God's created what? Heaven and earth. Poof. Duality, 2 opposites. And God created the light, and God created darkness. Opposites. The waters above and the waters below. Opposites, and so forth. So, in Kabbalah, the number 2 is the representation of this world. In fact, actually, the number 2 is the representation of creation. Even the number 2 does not exist in this world in the pure form, because everything we see around us is a combination of 1 2 with another 2. In other words, it's a combination of different elements. So what do you have when you combine the 2 with the 2? You have the 4. So in Kabbalah, the number 4 is a more accurate representation of this world, not the pure 2, that it will be talking about element in the pure form as they were created. Everything that we have is a combination of those, so it's always 2 plus 2 equals 4. I hope I didn't lose you. This is a little bit complicated, and I will try to leave it there for now, but you have to understand the concept of duality of this world. Okay? You're welcome, Michael. Welcome, Jack. Welcome to the class. So, basically what they are saying is, yes, that's true. In this world, we have the upper Yud, the lower Yud, and the Vav. But when you reach, through the teachings of Kabbalah, the presence of God, there is no duality anymore. So, saying water is untruth. There is no water in the presence of God. There is water here. When the world was created, you have the waters above and the waters below. But in the presence of God, as represented here by the pure marble stones, I'm not sure what they used that specific analogy, that specific image. In the presence of God, there is no duality. It does not exist. We Jews, we don't believe in any kind of duality of our divine being, of God. We don't believe that there is a God and a devil. We believe that everything is coming from the one God, which is a very interesting theological statement, because then you have to explain evil in the world. I guess to a certain level, it's easier to say, well, every evil in the world is a consequence of the existence of the devil. Because if it's evil, it cannot come from God. Well, in Judaism, what we say, and it's very bold, is no. Even though sometimes it's difficult to understand, everything, not almost everything, everything is coming from God. And then we have to deal with that and understand how that works and why that works that way. That's actually from a different level. Hello, Jiku, welcome. So, this is pretty much what Rabbi Moses Ben Jacob Cordovero is saying here. We're going to talk about the tree of life in a little bit. But before that, I would like to try to explore with you why the four different rabbis had different outcomes when they approach the study of Kabbalah. Because it looks like when the first three levels, easy peasy lemon squeezy, no problem at all. But the problem was when they were at the place of the pure marble stones, which means when they reached the higher level, when they embarked themselves in the study of Kabbalah, that's when they were harmed in different ways. So let's try to understand why. Shelley, you said evil in duality, opposite of good, or even opposite of Hashem. Well, it is the opposite of good, but it's not necessarily the opposite of Hashem. There are different ways of understanding evil, but I don't want to go there right now, because I said that's probably talking about good and evil and the oneness of God deserves a specific class for that, because it's very complex and it takes time to wrap our heads around that. So let's try to understand a little bit more about these four rabbis. So what I did, and I thought it was, at least to me, it was an interesting exercise to try to understand who they were and why perhaps they ended up the way they ended up when they approached Kabbalah. And maybe that will give us a hint that if we want to study mysticism, we should try to learn from their mistakes so we won't have the mistakes. Remember, many of you probably watch our services for the high holidays, and that was exactly what I talk on Yom Kippur. One of the ways we get wiser is by learning by somebody else's mistakes, right? Because of course, if we make a mistake, yeah, sure, you learn from your lesson, you become wiser after that, but isn't that better to learn from somebody else's mistake? So let's try to understand what were the mistakes from those three rabbis. And I say three rabbis because Rabbi Akiva is presented as the one who actually did it in the proper way. He entered in peace and exited in peace. He actually grew with experience instead of being harmed. Okay. So, who is the first one? Ben Azai actually was called Shimon ben Azai. And we have some hints of who he was from the text from the rabbis. The Talmud, for example, would say, with the passing of Ben Azai, diligent scholarship also ceased. Okay, let's try to understand. When the rabbis write something like this, you have to find hints in every word they use. What does it mean, diligent scholarship? Think about that word, diligent scholarship, okay? But Rashi explains a little bit more that. He said Ben Azai was diligently studying Torah day and night in the yeshiva. Aha! So now we know a little bit more about this guy. Not only he was a scholar, he was in the yeshiva day and night, and it looks like nobody was like him. So nobody put that many hours that he did into studying Torah. So whenever he died, well, basically nobody took over to get that title of being the guy who was day and night in the yeshiva. It didn't happen anymore. So then we can try to understand a few things about him, which I will mention in a minute. So let's see what the Talmud also said, Masechet Yevamot, say, what can I do? My soul so greatly desires the Torah. So Ben Azai made this statement in response to the question put to him why he had never married, which is a violation of both normal human desire as well as halakha, according to the rabbis, according to the Talmud. The world can be perpetuated by others. So in other words, what happened here? We have a case of a guy called Rabbi Shimon ben Azai who decided to remove himself from the physical world to dedicate himself to the study of Torah and eventually to the study of Kabbalah. What was his mistake from the hints that we get from the rabbis? Well, that's not healthy. If you detach yourself from the physical world, then basically you're going to die. You cannot do that. You have to eat, you have to drink, you have to sleep, you have to exercise, you have to eat healthy, so forth. Many things that we have to do are related to our physical body. We have to take care of our physical body. If you neglect that in this world, you're going to have a problem. So basically, yes, Shimon ben Azai, he was a great scholar. And you see, let's go back to this, to the first text. When it says, regarding him, the verse says, precious is in the eyes of God the death of his pious ones. Yeah, sure. Now that he died, he will probably go to heaven, right? Because of everything that he studied and all the merits and the mitzvot and everything. But perhaps the idea here is to find the balance. You can't put everything into your spiritual life, neglecting your physical life, because it's not going to end up well in this world. What about the people that needed the teachings of Ben Azai in this world? He basically, that's why he was confronted in the past. Say, dude, have a family, have a life. We need you here for a long time. But no, he decided to embark himself in a study of Torah, and eventually Kabbalah. He was really high. He was understanding great things. Right? And that's what happened. I don't know if it ever happens to you. When you start studying about theology and Kabbalah and the way God interacts with the world, it's fascinating, and we get engaged into it and we want to read more. But I said, okay, look what happened with Ben Azai. I understand your enthusiasm. Stop for a second and realize that you still have to take care for yourself. For me, the perfect example and the perfect symbol that we have that should guide our weekly lives is the symbol of whatever we do at the Shabbat table. 3 elements we have. We have the candles, we have the wine, and we have the bread. 3 symbols teaching us 3 different things. The candles represents spiritual life. The fires, the candle is the spirit, is the soul. The bread represents work, physicality to the fullest. The wine represents joy, enjoying life. You see, the thing is, we have to find a way to put the 3 together. It's not that one is more important than the other. You can't just live for the wine, in the sense that your life cannot be a 24/7 party. But you cannot live just for work without enjoying life a little bit. Or you cannot just dedicate yourself to a purely spiritual life, neglecting the other 2. It's not healthy. Look at Ben Azai. Remember what I said? Sometimes we learn from our mistakes, but it's even better if we learn from somebody else's mistakes. That's why they are presenting the story of Ben Azai, so we can understand, or we can learn from his mistakes, so we won't be at that place. Let's continue. Next was Ben Zoma. This was a very interesting character. Ben Zoma said, who is wise? This is one of his teachings. He who learns from all people, and it says, from all those who taught me, I gained understanding. Who is strong? He who conquers his evil inclination. As it says, better is one slow to anger than a strong man, and one who rules over his spirits than a conqueror of a city. Who is rich? He who is satisfied with his lot. As it is said, when you eat the toil of your hands, you are fortunate, and it is good for you. You are fortunate in this world, and it's good for you in the world to come. Who is honored? He who honors others. As it says, for those who honor me will I honor, and those who scorn me will be degraded. Okay? And this is from Pirkei Avot. Now, Rabbi Todros Abulafia has a very interesting theory about this. Ben Zoma gazed and went insane because he wasn't complete in his piousness and clarity as was Ben Azai. When he gazed at the brilliant light in the Pardes, it was more than his mind could handle, and he became psychotic. In the Talmud, the Aramaic word used is nitrafada ato, for he could not clearly understand that which he saw. Now, this is the interesting thing. Look at Pirkei Avot, and if you look at other teachings from Ben Zoma, he was always trying to explain things from a rational point of view. Go again, read it again. Who is wise? He who learned from most people. He was a rationalist. What Abulafia is saying, he tried to approach the study of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism from his rational approach, which is impossible. As you're going to see in a minute when I bring you some of the text from the Zohar, for example. You have to put your rational, within-the-box mentality aside for a minute and to approach it from another point of view. You have to involve your feelings. You have to involve your imagination. You can't just use a rational mind. Ben Zoma tried to rationalize Kabbalah, and he failed. He failed miserably, and he kind of lost it because trying to use that approach into something that it doesn't really belong to that world. And once again, his example was left on that text, so we can learn from it. And if you ever try to study Kabbalah, you have to approach it with an open mind. You have to leave aside all of that structure or preconception that you already have about the way of the world or the way God relates to human beings. Sometimes we believe that we have everything figured out. And then when we try to study Kabbalah, basically either you struggle with it so much that you lose it, or what happens sometimes is you say, oh, this is all junk, and I'm out of it. Which is kind of what happened with our next character, which is Acher, Elisha ben Abuya. He actually misunderstood mysticism in the following way. Regarding Elisha ben Abuya, also known as Acher, or also known as you-know-who was considered one of the greatest sages, actually. Before he quit Judaism, he was at the stature of Rabbi Akiva. He made a grievous error, this being the relationship between the Yud Elyon, the supernal unity, and the Yud HaTachton, the lower unity. Remember when I showed you the Aleph, the two Yuds, the two parts of the Aleph, the upper world, the lower world. Don't get scared by these fancy words of Yud Elyon and Yud HaTachton. What he's talking about is the upper world and the lower world, or heaven and earth, of the presence of God and our physical limitations. So these two concepts. He thought that there were two separate ways of divine providence. He thought that the entire Torah and all the mitzvot are given only to those who have not yet perceived the Yichud Elyon, but only the Yichud HaTachton. So basically what he's saying is, you know what, all this Torah, remember the first three levels that we talk about, the literal meaning, the allegory, and the drash? That's for losers. That's for the ones who don't understand that the real thing is only connecting with God and with God only. We don't need the commandments. That is a veil that you have to. Once you understand the way of God, you can get rid of all the commandments of Torah and all the silly stories presented from the Torah. That's just a waste of time. The only important thing is to understand the ways of God up in heaven, and that's it. Well, that's why basically he quit Judaism, in the sense that he stopped fulfilling mitzvot, because he thought that mitzvot were unnecessary and they were only for people who were at the lower level. For he thought, there is no king without a people. Who will serve God and do as God wishes? However, the one who, being able to perceive the Yichud Elyon, realizes that there is nothing in existence other than God, and that all is nullified before him. Therefore, there is no place for Torah and mitzvot, for there really is not any free will to merit reward or punishment. So that was the concept of Elisha ben Abuya. And it's interesting, because this is not new to some people who embark into the study of Jewish mysticism, that basically they think that that's the only important thing, and they neglect all the other commandments of the Torah, or all the other methods of studying the Torah. Who cares about pshat, the literal meaning? That's useless to study it. What we are talking about here is understanding the greatness of God, and you're trying to teach me the literal meaning of a verse. Well, that was the approach of Elisha ben Abuya, and he removed himself from Judaism. He understood that he was beyond and above everybody else, and everybody else was wrong. So, the Vilna Gaon says something very interesting, and I love what he has to say. He said, there is pshat, literal, and there is sod, mystical. There is halakha, law, and there is Kabbalah, mystical revelation. Yet, there is sod in halakha, there is mysticism in Jewish law, and there is pshat, and also there is literal meaning. And there is a pshat to Kabbalah also. You can apply the rules of pshat even to Kabbalah. And there is sod, and also there is mysticism. All things, be it halakha or Kabbalah, must be learned, everything, and applied to the sod level. For one without the other means the nullification of both. Nowhere do we see this more than in the case of Elisha ben Abuya. What an amazing thing. Basically what it's saying, the Vilna Gaon says, is all the four levels of the Pardes are important and necessary. And that's why it says that Rabbi Akiva, who was famous by the word for being a Kabbalist and a mystic, was the only one who was able to make it in and out. Because the fact that he became a Kabbalist and a mystic didn't mean that he neglected the observance of Torah and mitzvot. He was successfully able to blend the two worlds. And I believe that that's the best way that we can have to grow, because basically you prepare your soul for the Olam Haba, from the other world, and at the same time you enjoy this physical world, putting the two together. You can't have one without the other. Let's continue. So these are the four levels of Pardes that I was talking before. So we have the pshat, the straightforward explanation of literal meaning of the text, the drash, the deeper explanation of the text based on established exegetical principles known from tradition. Okay, there is the remes, and the word remes literally means the hint of allusion. In essence, remes is a lower level of the profound understanding of the Torah represented by sod. So sometimes remes and sod could overlap, and but sod is usually, if you get into it, it's a higher level above remes. Let me put this on italics. I don't like it the way it was before. And then you have the sod, the Kabbalistic, secret, mystical explanations of the text. Okay? Shelley, you said, because Torah is the foundation upon which it all rests, including Kabbalah. Well, the Kabbalah is part of Torah. We have, you probably heard about the concept of written Torah an oral Torah. Written Torah is the Torah that we read every week in the synagogue, the one on the scroll. Then you have the oral Torah, that in these days what we call the Talmud. But also the Kabbalah, these mystical principles, we also believe that they were revealed by God to Moses. And that was also taught from Moses to the next generation and so forth. So it's all part of the oral law, except that it was not written in the Talmud. It was actually written later on in other Kabbalistic texts, but it's all coming from God. So it's all part of the divine law, so it's all part of Torah. Because when we say Torah, we are talking about all the above. I hope that's clear. Michael Lehoff, can we get a copy of our presentation material? Very interesting stuff. I like to research a bit. Yeah, first and foremost, it's staying on YouTube. So after the class, you can always replay it as many times as you can. So for that, it's always there. You have Torah first before Kabbalah. Yes, that's why if you enter to the Pardes, if you see the way Rabbi Akiva is presenting it, you have to go through the other three levels before you are ready for the fourth. If you don't have a solid foundation in Torah, then what I've seen on people who try to tackle Kabbalah before studying Torah, they will most likely relate to Elisha ben Abuya and to never go back to Torah. They just stay there. So it's very important to have a solid foundation in Pshat, Remes, and Drash before you approach the other one. Okay, let's move on. I wanted to bring you just at least one example of each one of these four approaches from one verse of the Torah. This is something I'm telling you this because I remember when I studied the concept of Pshat, Drash, Remes, and Sod at the seminary. My God, nobody did this with me. Of course, I have a rabbi talking about Pshat, Drash, Remes, and Sod and what it means and blah blah blah, and giving examples, but giving examples from different places. What I wanted to do for you is to give you an example from the same verse, so you can compare one to the other. And I wanted to take the verse right from the beginning of the Torah. Let's take the very first verse of Genesis 1:1. In part because this class is supposed to be about Bereshit. So why don't take something from the book of Bereshit? And so let's go to the very first verse of the Torah. Let's start with Pshat. Genesis 1:1. And you know what it is. Genesis 1:1, the beginning, God created heaven and earth, right? And so forth. Basically, what Rashi is saying about Genesis 1:1, it says, if you come to interpret it according to its Pshat, interpret it thus, in the beginning of creation of heaven and earth. Why is Rashi saying that? Because you might think that what he's saying, that the first thing that God created was heaven and earth. So basically, what Rashi is saying, no. From a literal point of view, from the grammar of the verse, that will be wrong. So basically, Rashi here is trying to teach us the proper way to understand the grammar of the verse. You see, it's interesting. Probably somebody who studies Kabbalah doesn't care about the grammar of the verse. But Rashi, who is trying to be faithful to the pshat, to the literal meaning of the verse, he's extremely concerned about understanding the verse properly. So it says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, should be understood in the beginning of creation of heaven and earth. So it's a prelude to the actual creation that is going to start with, and God said, let it be light. And that was the first act of creation. Okay? So again, according to Rashi's linguistic analysis, the word Bereshit, in the beginning, does not actually mean in the beginning, but rather in the beginning of. You see, that little word, of, is extremely important to properly understand the verse. And this is a perfect example of pshat, of the pshat methodology to study Torah. And yeah, it's something that when you go to seminary, you will spend a lot of time doing that. If you want to learn lots about this, you can, if you can find the teachings of Nehama Leibovich, this Israeli scholar, who was a brilliant woman who was an expert in Torah, she will spend a lot of time into that, into trying to understand the meaning of the words, and she will be connecting words from one part of the Torah to another one, so you can properly understand the grammar of the verse and so forth. She was an expert in Pshat. So let's move on to the next one. The next one that I want to talk to you is the remez. And the remez is the allegory, trying to find the allegory within the text. So same verse, Genesis 1:1. The Vilna Gaon says, all 613 commandments are hinted to in the word Bereshit. For example, the commandments of Pidyon Haben is hinted via the phrase Ben Rishon Acharei Shloshim Yom Tifdeh. A first son after 30 days should be redeemed. And the acronym of the first letter of this phrase is Bereshit. So basically, he said Bereshit is an allegory of the mitzvah, the commandment of Pidyon Haben. I don't know if you ever have that. If you have a baby boy and your firstborn, you have to be brought in front of a Kohen, and there is a ritual that is performed after 30 days of life of the baby. It's very interesting. We still do it. Basically, what you have to do is to give money to the priest, but we don't have priests anymore, but we know who is a Kohen, right? So you have to get a Kohen, maybe a friend of you, or through the synagogue, who come to your home, or you go to the synagogue, and there is a text, there's a role-playing text that you do to redeem your firstborn, because according to the Torah, the firstborn basically belong to the temple, they belong to God. So if you don't want, they have to be redeemed through money, so they can belong to you and they can be your son. Again, so you do that with a Kohen. In this day, we don't have a temple, but we still have Kohanim. We have descendants of priests, so you have to pay them an amount of money to redeem your son, and it has to be done after 30 days. So the Vilna Gaon said this is a perfect example. The word Bereshit, according to Remez, is an acronym of Ben Rishon Acharei Shloshim Yom Tifdeh. A first son after 30 days should be redeemed. And this is a perfect example of Remez. Sometimes they play with the numerology of the word, and that's what I said, that's when it starts getting, the limits are getting blurry with the sod, with the mystical approach, but usually it's understood when you study the words from the numerological point of view, with the numerical value that belongs to the word of Remez. Because the whole idea behind the numerical value is, if you have two words in the Torah with the same numerical value, they are somehow connected, even if there is no clear connection between the two. It's almost like two different elements in life that they're connected because they have the same atomic number. You know what I mean? They're somehow connected in essence. So this is the same with the numbers. So when you study Torah with that, connecting numbers and words using that method, that's called the remez. Then we have the drash, which is the midrash. You probably heard lots of midrashim from the rabbis. Usually the midrash try to fill up the gaps, trying to understand what is not written in the Torah, but by bringing those examples and those stories, you can better understand what the Torah is saying. So even Rashi brings more than one. It is interesting. If you go to study Rashi and Bereshit, you will see that he brings several different explanations of the same verse. And I love this because he explained the first verse from a pshat, and now he's going to bring a drash on exactly the same verse. He said the Hebrew word Bereshit in the beginning can be homiletically understood to mean due to the first, where first, Reishit, that's the word in Hebrew, is a word used elsewhere to refer to the Torah and to the Jewish people. Thus, one might say that the world was created for the sake of Torah and the Jewish people. So, Reshit basically is referring to the Torah and the Jewish people. But if you said Be Reshit, means for the sake of Torah and the Jewish people, God created heaven and earth. So what Rashi is presenting here is almost like an imaginary conversation in God's head that make God decided to use the word Bereshit. He's answering the question, why is the Torah starting with the word Bereshit? Doesn't say it anywhere. So using the methodology of Drash, he explains why the Torah opens with the word Bereshit. And then we come to the Sod. Be prepared for this one because this is mind-blowing. And then you can understand why somebody lost his mind trying to study Kabbalah. Listen to this. This is from the Zohar. Same verse, the explanation of Genesis 1:1 in the Zohar. With the beginning of the manifestation of the king's will, that is, when the king desired to create the world, a heart spark made an engraving upon the supernal light. This heart spark, which emanated from the most concealed of all concealed things, from the secret of Ein Sod, endlessness, and took a shapeless form. The spark was then inserted into the center of a circle that was neither white nor black nor red nor green nor any color at all. When he began its measurements, he created bright colors that shone into the empty space and the engraving. From within the spark, this heart spark, a fountain spouted, from which the shades down below received their color. Amazing and clear, right? So this is Sod. You can understand now why this is something that you cannot take lightly. You cannot approach this with a rational approach. You need to keep your mind open, and you have to use your imagination, and also you have to use your feelings, because sometimes what happened is when the Zohar was written, you have an author who has this profound understanding of God, but it's an understanding that is beyond rationalization of God. It involves feelings and images. But how do you put feelings? You know, when you have gut feeling about something and you know it, but you cannot explain it with words, and you try to use words, but most of the time what happens is when you fail, because how can you explain somebody why you like so much certain food and not some others? And you have to explain what you feel when you eat that specific food that you like, and what you feel when you eat that food that you don't like. It's very difficult for the other person to understand what you're trying to say, to the point that the other person will feel what you feel. That's why the Zohar is so rich in this kind of images. So hopefully by imagining all the things, you can feel what the author felt at the time that this was written. Michael, you said we studied this in physics. We call it the Big Bang. Well, it's the Big Bang. Yeah, there is the Big Bang. There is something about that in the contraction and then of the expansion that the Zohar talks exactly about that. Yeah, it has a lot of common with the Big Bang theory. Rocky Pollack, so disregard the text, and you're a Kabbalist. No, you don't have to disregard the text. You have to try to understand the text. The better you understand the text, the better understanding you're going to have about God, the world, and the way God connects to the world, because that's one of the things that we try to understand, how God relates to this world. So you read the Zohar with the goal of trying to feel what the author felt. That's why traditionally the Zohar or Kabbalah is being taught one-on-one, because you supposedly have a teacher who kind of have the same feeling of the author of the Zohar, this big understanding of God, and it will try different methods until the teacher feels that you're feeling it too. That's why studying sometimes Kabbalah in a classroom is very limiting. Although some Kabbalists will say in these days that we have more tools to try to explain complex concepts, like Michael, you were saying, the Big Bang, right? Well, try to explain something like Big Bang 500 years ago. There was nothing like that. Now you can present something like the Big Bang and explain the world of physics and everything, and you can. It's an extra tool that you have to present something in a different way. So it's fascinating in this generation how lucky we are to have all these other concepts that can help us to better understand God. For example, when we say that God is aware of everything we do, and I'm trying to go back in time 500, 1,000 years ago, and try to explain to someone that there is a way for something or somebody who is not there with you to know what you're doing, right? They will say that's impossible. But today we know that you're not here in the room that I am, but you're exactly aware of what I'm doing. You can see me. So we have ways of doing that. So now I don't have to explain that it's possible because it exists. Or it is possible for things that you cannot see, feel, hear, smell to exist, because we know that there are microwaves and other things that they exist all around us. So now we are open, at least we're open to the concept that there is something that you don't necessarily see or hear or smell or touch, but exists. So we have other ways, but I still feel that we kind of lost this one-on-one approach of teaching mysticism to be sure that the student actually gets the point. Anyway, that's the way I think. Michael, Dawkins, creation, Richard, okay. California start Kabbalah centers and everywhere. Yeah, no Torah involved. Yeah, at least I'm not wearing the red string, right? Okay, so I have a couple more texts for you. The other thing that I wanted to present for you is the Tree of Life, something that you may experience if you study Kabbalah. And this is basically it's trying to represent the way God connects to the world. All these sephirot, or these circles that you see there, it's the path of the infinite to connect with the finite. You cannot be just a direct connection. It's impossible to have something infinite and finite coexisting on the same space. So God takes this layer of separation, and each level up is closer to the perfect oneness of God. It's difficult to understand like this, but basically remember when I talk about the duality of the world, the higher you go, the less dual becomes and the more one becomes. And that's why Kabbalah also involves teachings to go up. So let me read this for you. The main teaching diagram in Kabbalah is called the Tree of Life. It consists of 10 qualities called sephirot, or emanation. These qualities originate from the divine being, and they are echoed in human nature because we are created in the image of God. The sephirot are considered revelations of the Creator's will, and they should not be understood as 10 different gods, but as 10 different ways the one God reveals His will through the emanations. The 10 sephirot are step-by-step process illuminating the divine plan, and it unfolds itself in creation. Okay? So, yeah, it's all part of God. It's different ways of understanding God, and each way will give you a better understanding of the divine being. And this is not simple. And this is not something that you can go with your already formed rational brain, because we know what happened with a Rabbi tried to do that in the Talmud. It didn't go well for him. So, and I have one more text for you. The last one is 1 o'clock. One thing, another Kabbalistic teaching from Rabbi Chaim Vital. He said, before creation, the exalted light was simple. It filled all existence. So there was no empty space. Everything was filled with infinite light. The concept of beginning and end did not exist. In other words, there was no time before creation. Time is a byproduct of creation. The same with space. There was no space before. The concept of space is a byproduct of creation. Everything was simply light, infinite light. When it was God's will to create all the worlds, he constricted himself at the central point of his light, Big Bang. And exactly at the middle, he withdrew his light and pulled it back to the sides around the central point. Thus, an empty space encircling that central point came into being. And this was taught way before the theory of the Big Bang was a thing. This is something that is presented in Kabbalah. It's a fascinating thing, but as I mentioned before, it's not something that you can just go and study it. And I believe it's not something that you just go and study instead of studying the other 3 levels of Torah, because each one will have an application to our lives. And the rabbis understand that in order for us to build a fulfilling and meaningful life in this earth, not just thinking about the future in the Olam Haba, we also have to think about this earth. It is extremely important that we nurture and we study the 4 levels of the Pardes. Okay? Well, thank you so much for tuning in. It was great to share the classroom with you guys. You were amazing. Your comments, I love always your comments. Again, please remember that if you want to have all the notification every time we go live, all you have to do is to subscribe to all our channels. If you're on Facebook, give us the thumbs up. If you're on YouTube, hit the bell. And there is another thing that you can do for us. Hit that share button so we can reach to more people and we can enrich our lives together, touching even more lives that we are doing now. And it's amazing and it's incredibly satisfying for the whole team at the Share Zedek to do that. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and hope to see you soon. Bye for now. See you next Thursday. Bye, everyone.